handful of homes, it's going to be very expensive per home. The more homes you underground, because the entire Edison circuit is going underground, and that includes the feed to the neighborhood, becomes very expensive part of the proposal. So we've modified allowing the residents, property owners to determine what district they want to see, and then we'll test that size and number of homes with Edison on preliminary estimates of cost so that you can determine the size of the district you want. There isn't, but I will tell you, you're not, if it's too small, you're not going to like the number. The approximate cost per household or per property for undergrounding is somewhere between, say, $24,000 and $36,000 per home. That if we sell bonds, that you can pay them off over 20 years or pay them off initially. But the limit to your size is going to be based on those economies. You're not going to want to see a $50,000 per parcel cost. You'd rather see the 24 to 36 ballpark.
John, if I could add, Councilmember Harnick just made a good point, which is that with the Tamarisk District, we had an initial proposed project that came in, an initial proposed district, and then some neighbors on Heliotrope decided, hey, wait a second, we're interested too. We'd like to see if we could come along and realize some economies of scale, and they certainly did. The project ended up being more cost-effective by combining those two districts.
But
so that flexibility helps.
It's important to note that Heliotrope is adjacent to the Tamarisk District as well, so they're via backyards.
So bottom line is the less homes in the district, the more costly. It's easier because you're dealing with less. It's easier to get the 70%, the 50%. Obviously, if there were two neighbors, they could reach agreement very easily, but far, far more expensive. We're going to go to Roland next. I do, though, however, I see that the Housing Commission meeting must be over because our mayor, Susan Marie Weber, has joined us. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Great.
The guru of undergrounding, the maven of utility lines, Roland Alden. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a couple of questions stacked up here.
You only get one, Roland. I'm sorry.
Please.
Okay,
It'll be a
we'll give you
minute.
two.
Edison, before they leave, can explain why Deep Canyon hasn't been done under Rule 20A, and probably also how many circuits are on it. It would seem to qualify.
I think this is probably a two-part question, because I think Sam, I don't know that he's actually evaluated Deep Canyon, so you haven't had a chance to evaluate, and he's our project manager. So first, he would have to evaluate that to give you an accurate answer. We would only be making assumptions if we were to just assume that based on...
I'll bet that Jeff is familiar with it.
So, but Jeff does not evaluate Rule 20A project criteria. So while he's our local planner, he could probably provide that information to Sam, and it's something that we could follow up with the city on.
Did you have another question beyond that, or? Yeah. Okay.
With regards to economy of scale, we've attempted a 1,000 plus home project. Didn't quite work out. So you had mentioned that the process had been successfully used, but I think it would be fair to tell everybody that the process has failed, and it has failed at large scale. But with regards to large scale, your rough number for the entire city is north of $200 million. But that's 6 times higher than the kind of low-end estimates from some of the utility think tanks. So it would seem like it's a very squishy number. And
let me give, because you've got two questions, so let me give David an opportunity to address the failed projects. Let me just talk about the squishy number. It is squishy, and the reason it's squishy, I'm a CPA, that's a technical term, by the way, squishy. We use that all the time. The reason it is because you don't know the cost until you do the engineering studies. You don't know what's under there, you just don't know what it's going to cost. And I think we try to be conservative because we don't want to tell people, oh, yeah, we can do this, it's 100 million. And then the engineering studies come in and our worst fears, it's 250 million or more. So I think Jennifer was very careful, David was very careful to say it's a wide range because you don't know until the engineering is done. Now, as to the failed projects, David.
Just to piggyback on what you were just saying, the rough order of magnitude estimate that Edison gave us for the Tamarisk heliotrope project has a plus or minus accuracy of 40%. So that tells you how spongy the numbers are. With regard to the, because neighborhoods vary, I can let Edison address that.
The rough order of magnitude estimates vary depending on, because we're making certain assumptions about how the undergrounding is going to be done. We're looking at the project up front with all the poles still standing before any construction costs, before any engineering costs or design costs are done. So we have to make certain assumptions to identify potential paths, potential types of construction, potential line routes, potential restoration costs. And all of that is not based on actual numbers. It's based on what could be done. So we have to have some leeway in there to not put ourselves or the city in a position to where we've underestimated our project and not given the property owners a fair opportunity to hear a number that is fair and equitable as far as the cost of undergrounding that neighborhood.
And then
David.
to address the large-scale project that I believe Mr. Alden was talking about, I believe you're referring to Palm Desert Country Club. Palm Desert Country Club did not follow our process. It did not require the 70% petition. That was something that happened outside of our process. There were some residents who served on a city committee who expressed a great interest in this, and the city agreed to look into it. And unfortunately, many residents were not at all interested, and so that process shut down. But it did not follow the process that I outlined here. It was outside of that process.
And David, the other factor, once we completed the engineering, was the same time frame that the golf course went down.
That's a good point.
And the residents said, why are we undergrounding when we have a dead golf course next to us? So that got in the way of the undergrounding. That was one point on the Palm Desert Country Club. Another issue, when James is talking about the engineering, Edison looks at how they underground their lines, but remember that line also has to go through your yard, under your fence, to your meter. They don't know all of the exact issues in getting that drop line from their transmission or transformer to your home. That's also an expensive part of this process, and that's something we cannot, as a city, pay for.
And Councilmember Harnick pointed out, in addition to that, John, there's the variable of Verizon and Time Warner Cable, because they use those same poles and lines as well.
Well, my point was to the difficulty of getting an accurate number. I mean, they do a good job in looking at where those lines go in the street and crossing streets and through a haystack channel, but it's hard to estimate the cost when that drop goes underground in your yard to your meter.
I believe the city's number includes that cost, so
And we'll dial down to that level of detail. But let me give others, we'll go with this lady, and then we'll go to these two gentlemen.
How does it work for us to pay for it? Is it a bond issue, you said, or is it attached to our property taxes? Is it, and what happened?
Under the 20B, the forming of neighborhood assessment district. So, David, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that, or John, but
And also what happens when you sell your home?
Normally the city would want to issue a bond for the total cost and put that bond payment on the property so that your property taxes can pay the debt service of the bond.
let me pause there for a second, because I want to clarify that, because that's important that we all understand that. So by issuing a bond, what that means is that the city borrows the money, and people, invest in the bonds, and the city gets, let's say, $20 million, or whatever that number is. It then uses that $20 million to pay Edison, engineers, whoever else to construct the project, to underground, right? So the city needs to be repaid that money so it can repay the bonds. How does it do that? That's where the term assessment district comes in. Your home is assessed, your proportionate share of the annual payments. And instead of sending a check like you do to the bank, it's added to your property tax. In fact, if you haven't done it lately, because, you know, property taxes are due April 10th, so look at your property tax bill, and you'll see all these line items. And besides the school district and fire tax and so forth, there may be bond issues being repaid. So that's the mechanism, okay? Let me just let John finish, and then we'll go to this gentleman who's next.
The buyer and the seller can agree on either paying it off or keeping it on the property tax roll, pay off the assessment. It really depends. And in fact, the property owner can determine if they don't want it on their property tax bill on the Highlands undergrounding, on the property, several homeowners paid it up front so that it wouldn't be on their property tax bill.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, I'm Ernie DeMarbier, and your former Edison district manager and I were very close friends. And I've got a riser pole in my backyard that feeds underground to the manhole at Cook and Fairway, which goes from there, it goes into the Vintage. So there's a combination there, but I do know that that underground, the riser is in my property, and when they have problems, they come and check that lead that's coming out of my backyard all the way down to the corner that goes into Vintage. That I know because they've come in and tried to trace out where the problems was. But there is underground cable going from my backyard all the way to the manhole at the corner of Cook and Fairway. And from there, it goes into the Vintage. Now, they trace back trouble of when they get a problem. Now, we've already got that going down there. That I know, because they'll come and check in there. So we've got that. What happened? I've got this giant riser pole in my backyard. It's huge. It comes from the rear property line, which is south of Fairway on those homes, and it crosses right there, and that riser pole sticks in my corner lot. Okay,
Yeah, and we're not going to, there's a lot of people here with major wires in their backyard, so we're not going to look at individual properties. We've got just a few minutes left, so I'm going to let's go to this side. We haven't been over here for a while. If we can go to this gentleman over here and then the one behind him.
We've heard from the electric company. What other conditions, and in anybody's experience that's got more experience than I in this, do we have with telephone communication and cable companies? Do they have certain conditions that have to be satisfied, like, SEC?
They do, and I'll let Jennifer address it or one of the staff, but it becomes one process. It's not done separately, so they join in the process once it's underway. But please, go ahead.
Rule 20 is specific to Edison, doesn't cover the other utilities. So Verizon,
The microphone closer.
And stand up, please.
the Edison Rule 20 tariff is specific to Edison, it doesn't cover the other utilities as well. Verizon does have their own undergrounding tariff. It's Verizon's Rule 40. It's very similar to Edison's tariff. They're also a CPUC governed public utility company. Time Warner does not have any Public Utility Commission tariffs. They're generally guided by the franchise agreements with the city.
And the bottom line is, though, as I said, that it becomes one single process. The utilities communicate with each other, and it all goes underground. It's not like just Edison goes underground, and now you have to deal with Verizon or Time Warner Cable. Okay? And I think the gentleman back there had a question.
Yes, my name is Donald Robinson. I have a question for the Edison people over there. If we were to form our own local district, is there any way we could get some comprehensive electrical engineering on how the existing power is run? I live off of Deep Canyon, and it seems to be a hodgepodge up there of how things are run. And I know that would be part of the cost in running something like that. So how would we do that?
Well, I guess any system improvement would be re-engineered. If you want to know information about your specific circuit existing, it's something you can contact local planning about, and we can talk about your specific project. Jeff Goad here, you can maybe get his contact information after the meeting.
We're going to take two more, okay? And I will say this, there's a number of staff people here. I don't want to speak for Jennifer, but and my fellow council members, but I will certainly be here as long as you want to stay after. We did, by the way, get a lot of emails. So those have been entered into the public record. We acknowledge those. And we had a few comments where, 5 o'clock was or 4 o'clock was inconvenient for people. So if there are future meetings, we'll talk about, you're never going to find a perfect time, but we'll talk if there's a better time.
I just wanted to add that we are recording the meeting, which is one of the reasons why we're using the microphones. So if you have a family member or a friend who's interested, there's a stack of my business cards back on the table back there, along with some Rule 20B printouts to explain how Edison's rule works. Feel free to contact me and we'll get you a copy of the meeting, a DVD.
Okay. I said we'll take two more. You heard the bell. It's right at 5. Do you want to go over a little bit and allow a few more? Yes. Okay. All right. Let's keep it going then. Let's go over here and then you.
My name is Roy Argel, and I live on Deep Canyon. I moved here about 4 years ago, and one of the first things that I wanted to do was to replace the windows in my home from single pane to thermopane. And at that time, the city had a program which we subscribed to. I don't know if that program is still in effect, but I pay for my windows over a 5-year period. And it's approximately $1,000 a year. And I can tell you, it's absolutely unnoticeable when you make the payments. So to further comment on the city manager's point that if you're looking at $25,000 and you're looking at 25-year bond, you're looking at less than $100 a month for the most part, which makes it very affordable.
Thank you. And this lady here, please, David.
Thank you. Deborah Vogler. We live on Shadow Mountain Drive, and my question is just more perhaps at just a bare bones level here. It sounds from what I'm hearing that it's a piecemeal process, and people can argue about the process, whatever. That's one thing. But it sounds as though using this kind of process where you kind of go by group, by neighborhood, it could take, if you did want to do the whole Palm Desert area, it could take 20, 30, 40 years to do. By that time, or more, by that time, I'm kind of guessing that there's going to be a lot of technologies that come into play, including, smart grid, microgrids for smart cities, if you will. Those kind of technologies could supplant some of the things that we'd be doing now. And it almost seems like we need a higher level approach instead of this piecemeal, let's try and get little groups of pockets of neighborhood when the technology could actually be completely obsolete and not even needed in 15, 20, 30 years for things we don't even know about yet. That's just my comment. I don't know if the utilities have any insight into what's coming down the pike here for energy transmission.
Just don't let San Diego know, because they're going through 2066. David, did you have a comment on?
I just wanted to comment. You heard Councilmember Jonathan talk about San Diego. He just mentioned it again. San Diego is not doing a piecemeal process. They implemented a funding stream through their utility bills to do the entire city. That hasn't changed the fact that it's taking them 60 years to do it. because it's a very involved, time-consuming process. The design, the construction, it all takes a lot of time, and there are a limited number of crews to do that work. So regardless of how you pay for it, it's going to take a long time.
All right, just a couple more, and then we'll talk about the homework assignment. I think this lady here.
I'm Karen Lynn, and I live on Old Prospector. And I want to just thank Jonathan for taking a stand for this project, and also for Roland for being so persevering. I've been going to these meetings since about 2012. I even have the old agenda. It's almost exactly the same. I have it right here. It's the same thing. Rule 20A, 20B, 20C. I think as a city, we really do, I agree, we need to stop thinking about small parceling, and I know that Roland has gone over this again and again. If you small parcel, you will lose the power of the city to get it done all at once. And if you're going to do it block by block, the rich folks will get it done, and they won't care about you or the rest of us. I also think that right now we're doing a lot of good fact-finding. We need to find out all our facts before we start making decisions. We can't just stop. We can't just start going small parcel. We have to get all of the facts for the whole thing